So welcome back, my friends. In a previous tutorial, we created a new project and we also created our first component. And now it's a good time to actually define some data inside our component. So before doing that, I have to mention that every component needs to have a name. So I will give a name to this component, just my component. And that's it. That's how you just add a name to the component. And the second thing I want to add here is some data. So in order to add some data, you write data, then open and close brackets, and then open and close curly brackets. And here you have to return a JavaScript object from the data function. In my case, the data is in this case a function that returns a JavaScript object. So we just have to write return and then open and close curly brackets. So inside this JavaScript object, I can define my data. And the first thing I want to define is application title. So I will just here write title. And let's go back and see what our application looks like. And as you can see here, the title is to do application. So I will just write here to do application. Okay. So now that we have defined the data inside our component, I would like to print this data. So in order to print the data, I think we have already learned this. We can use the interpolation. So the text interpolation is nothing but two curly braces. And here we then define the name of the variable that's defined inside the data function. In my case, this variable is called title. So I will write here just the title. Okay, so if I go back to the website and if I refresh, you can see that the title of application is printed. Well, that's good. That's good. We are progressing and that's pretty good. There is another thing that I would like to mention here is there is another way you can print the data. And this way is not so popular. So this is the preferred way, and I will use this way in my next videos. But I just want to show you that there is another way you can do that. And that's by using, so I will just print here h1 tag. And you can print some text inside this h1 tag by using the first directive that we will learn. It's vText directive. And inside the vText directive, you have to specify which variable you would like to print inside this h1 tag. So I will close the h1 tag. And then here inside the vText, I can say, okay, I would like to print this title variable. So I can copy this, paste it here, save it. And if I go back to my website, you can see that the effect's the same. So you can see here that I printed the title just 2 times using 2 different approaches. And one more time, the first approach is most common approach. You will see that in every Vue project. So I will also use that approach as well. So I'll just delete this here. So now that we have printed the title, and if you check back our application, we can see that after the title, we have to print our tasks, right? So we have to somehow find a way we can print multiple tasks in a row. So the first way that we could do that is just by doing this. So task 1, and then we could print, I don't know, call that. Task 2 is by tickets, and so on. So in order to print this, we would have to go inside the template, right? And we have to open, let's say, a div, and inside this div, we have to print the task 1, right? So I'll just copy this, paste it here, and I will close this div. So if you go back to the website, you see that the first task appeared. But let's go back. We have the second task as well. So in order to print that, I can just copy this and change here the task 2. Well, you can see here, then the second task is printed. Well, this way works, but it's a bit complicated, because for every task I have to define a variable, and then for every variable that I define inside my data, I have to go to the template and print that. It will be somehow much easier if I could just, I don't know, define array of these variables and then just print that array, right? But to be honest, we can do that. So let's try to define a new variable here called tasks. And this variable is going to be an array. And inside this array, so just focus here, this is just notation for creating a new array in a JavaScript. So this array will consist of several objects, and instead of tasks, let's try to print, I don't know, the cities. This could be cities that I have visited, right? So the first city could be in New York. The second city could be, I don't know, Paris. And the third city could be Berlin. Okay, so I defined a new variable called cities, and this variable is just an array of strings. So this is the first string, this is the second string, and this is the third string. So it would be somehow really cool now if I could print these strings, right? So I will go here, I will define a new div here, and this is the second directive that we will learn right now. This directive will enable us to loop over the arrays and print the values that are defined inside the arrays. In order to do that, remember this, you write v minus 4, and I will close this div, and let's now concentrate here. So we want to loop through the cities, right? So I will copy the cities and I will paste it here. So cities is our first variable that we want to loop through. And I want to say for every city inside the cities. Okay, so what's happening here is I'm going through this variable called cities, and every time I'm assigning a value to the variable called city. So the first time the variable city will have value New York. The second time it will have a value Paris, and the third time it will have value Berlin. Okay, so if I want to print this, then I can again use interpolation, and now I can print the value of the city. Okay, so if I save this, if I go back to the website, then you can see here the Berlin, the Paris, and the New York, they are printed there. Okay, so I want to add some text here. I don't know, towns I've visited. Okay, so this sounds good. I'll just print this, and you can see towns that I visited are New York, Paris, and Berlin, right? But you can see here that I have some kind of an error here, right? So it's written that elements in the iteration accept to have vbind key directives. So what the hell is happening here, and what's that? So I will briefly write something here, and then I will jump to explain what that means. I will write here another directive that you will learn here. It's called v.bind, then semicolon key. And I want to print here a variable called city. So and you can see now there is no error. So what is happening here, and what does this mean? So in order to understand what this vbind key directive is doing, let's analyze what's happening when we are printing values inside the array. As you can see here on the left side, I have defined 3 cities, in New York, the Berlin, and Paris. And on the right hand side, I just defined a template where I want to print, where I'm looping over the cities, and I'm just printing the city name. And here I also wrote this v minus bind key is equal city. So what's happening when our application is starting is the view will say, okay, I have to go through these cities. So I will take a New York. I will assign New York to the city variable. and I will just then print the city. So New York is going to be printed on the page. Then the view framework will say, okay, there are still values in the city's array, so I will take a Berlin. I will assign Berlin to the city, and I will then print that city. So the Berlin is going to be printed. Then the view framework will say, okay, there are still values inside the city's array, and there is a Paris as a city left. So the view framework will assign Paris to the city variable here, and we will then just print city. And in our case, that's Paris. And when this page is rendered, then the view framework will say, okay, there are no values anymore in the city's array, so I'm done. But imagine that we visited Barcelona and we add this Barcelona town inside the city's array. So the view framework will conclude that the city's array just changed, and that means the view framework has to re-render the complete view. And there are two possible options. The first option, which is the view framework can do, is the view framework can say, okay, city's array just changed. So I can go and render New York once again. I can render Berlin once again. I can render Paris once again. And at the end, I can render Barcelona. And the second option, what view framework can do is the view framework can say, okay, city's array just changed. And there is a new value inside the array, which is Barcelona. So the New York, okay, this element is already rendered on the page. So I don't have to re-render that object, that element. So the view framework will do nothing. So the Berlin is also already displayed on the page. So view framework will not re-render that part of the page. The Paris is also rendered on the page, so view framework will not re-render it again. And the view framework will understand, okay, the Barcelona is the last element inside the array that's not printed. So I will just add Barcelona as the last element. And this will definitely optimize the speed of your application, because imagine that this city's array had, let's say, million of different elements. In the first case, every time you add a new element, the view framework would re-render million of objects on the page. And in this optimized version, the view framework will just add one element to the page. And the difference is huge, because if you want to render million of objects, it will cost you a lot of time. And if you just have to render one object, it will take a millisecond or even less. So when you are writing this vbind key, you are helping actually view framework to optimize the speed of your application. So by doing this, you are saying that every object has its own key. In my case, the key of every object is the name of the town. So the key of the New York is going to be New York. The key of Berlin is going to be Berlin. The key of Paris is going to be Paris. And by doing that, the view framework knows that the New York is already displayed on the page, and the view framework doesn't have to re-render that object once again. If you don't write this, then the view framework is going to re-render every object or every element of array every time when this array is changed, and you don't want to do that. And that's basically it. Now I hope you understand what the vbind key is, and I hope you understand what's happening here and what's happening when your page is rendered. So in the next video, we are going to start defining definitely our tasks, and we will also use this v4 directive to loop over our tasks.